Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to bring you Healing Heroic Antorus Part 2. Everything you need to know about the next 4 bosses of Antorus on Heroic. Right now we have Eonar, Imonar, Garth, and Varimathras. Starting off with Eonar, this fight is kind of a breeze, right? As a healer in particular, there's not a whole lot of responsibilities that you need to really be dealing with. You will, of course, have your fun extra action button that you can be using to fly all over the room. This will have a 30-second cooldown as the fight begins, and it also gives you an opportunity just to be able to move quickly to and from, so make sure you don't overuse it in case of an emergency and you need to be moving to an area very quickly. As a healer, the biggest thing here is making sure your group is actually properly divvied up. If everywhere you go, there's a healer there, ready to, top off somebody who's coming in. As long as people are staying in big packs together as they're dealing with some of the ads running all over the place, you should be fine here. The only way people really are dying is if they're spending too much time away from healers and they get ticked down by the constant raid damage that can happen here. So you will have Rain of Fel, which will draw a little circle around characters and deal a little burst of Fel damage to them. You will also have the Spear of Doom, which comes out from the spaceship, and it will just draw a line of Fel along the ground, just like the last boss in Upper Karazhan. These are the big mechanics you really have to be worrying for. Otherwise, add some damage, help get these ads down a little bit quicker, and you should be just fine. Now on to Imonar. You will be basically bouncing between each of these circular platforms where he will be leaving lots and lots of traps and tripwires and stuff like that to really just mess up your raid. So big things to watch out for as a healer here. The sleep canister is going to mark one player, then he's going to throw a sleep canister at them. The target will then be dispellable. When you dispel the canister, it will basically expel knockout gas to everyone nearby. So the player, when they get slept, spell them, make sure nobody else is nearby, and they're able to move back into the raid group here. So one really easy way to deal with this, because you also have to deal with another mechanic, which is the pulse grenades, which basically will never leave over the course of the fight, is ideally you will get everyone to hug a certain part of the room and kind of just move more in a circle around these platforms, trying to drop the pulse grenades away from everybody, but also making sure that the sleep canisters are going to be going in the exact opposite direction. That way you're not going to get anybody else slept. You can dispel them on normal mode, but on heroic, these players will be stuck there for 5 or 6 seconds, unable to move, unable to do anything until the effect expires there. So keep that in mind big time. When he will jump to the other side of the room, he will start casting and basically will be taking 99% less damage. The entire raid has to run over and go through all of his traps and tripwires and things like that. So a big thing is going to have like a green trap, which is going to be the stasis trap. This is going to stun you and will be dispellable, but it also will stun other targets nearby. So you have to make sure that one way that we dealt with it was we just had a lead man. Usually it was like a tank who would just run in front, deal with some of the more tighter gaps, because you can run around many of these, but a lot of times they're very, very tight gaps you have to deal with, and people have big feet and like to trip over these traps. So having a lead tank and then rotating through your healer dispels so that the tank can deal with the more obvious and the more annoying traps really makes it really, really easy to get through. So you're just able to constantly rotate through dispels, get everyone to a stack location. This is also a really good time for like a moving trank. As a disc priest, I just use Rapture here over the entire duration until I can actually get close enough to the boss to be able to start hitting him again and dealing some damage there. So ideally, and then the second time that he goes around, he will start leaving blast wires, the little tripwire lines that are spread out. They have a little fire line in between it. If you step through these deal raid-wide damage, and it accelerates very, very rapidly. You might end up having to break some of these in order to get to him, in which case you really need to make sure you have a raid cooldown running, or that everyone stops, gets healed up, and then starts running again here. On a heroic, there's really not a huge rush. It's just making sure that everyone stays as a group, gets into position, and is kind of following the same path every single time. You will have fireballs, going down the path. You will have all kinds of damage and stuff like that. That you really need to be worrying about. But the biggest thing is definitely going to be staying as a group, rotating through your healer cooldowns, and playing off what are going to be the most mobile ones that are going to be the most valuable there. Outside of that, once you get to the second platform, you will have small lasers that are going to be targeting players randomly. They need to make sure that they step away from other players because they do knock back, and making sure that they're going to be avoiding putting that much damage onto anybody else. So the more that you are micromanaging where the entire raid group is positioned, the easier it's going to be for you to put pulse grenades down, the easier it is for you to have any of the lasers that are going to be targeting your ranged DPS primarily. The easier it'll be for those players to run those lines out, take the damage, get knocked back, and not actually affect any of their other fellow raid members there. Now on to Kingaroth. This is the guy making all of the Fel Reavers that we've seen for such a long time. For him, he's going to have his central platform where he's basically just dug in to his own workshop, and then he has 3 small platforms around him where he will be spawning Fel Reavers periodically. The Fel Reavers that he creates will be green, red, and purple, and they have abilities that mimic the Garathi Worldbreaker or other mechanics that we've already kind of seen inside the instance itself. So, for example, you'll have Annihilation come from one of these Fel Reavers if it's completed, where you have to soak that green circle, otherwise it deals raid-wide damage. This time you only have to have 1 player soak it, and it will still deal the same amount of damage no matter how many people are soaking in that circle. So you will still have the Decimation, where it will be dealing raid-wide damage, and you'll be launching these rockets at the target, so it'll deal raid-wide damage. You will have Demolish, which is very similar to the purple circles on the Fellhounds, where you just have to have players stack up in them. It's not too big of a deal on Heroic to have people stack and soak for them and stack up a bunch of them, provided that you have big cooldowns available. But on, very high difficulties, or if you guys are really stressed for damage, you'll have to have some players soaking some of the circles and not stacking them up, because the debuff does accelerate very, very rapidly. So keep that in mind. Outside of the construction phase, where he'll try to build up these Fel Reavers, and if they complete, they'll be activating the abilities I just listed. Other than that, you have to watch out for the Ruiner, which is just him using his arm as a gigantic laser and just going across a small part of the room, much like Trilliax. Standing in this, basically going to die. You'll also have the Diabolic Bomb. You'll have 3 purple balls that will just be created and just start running around the room. When they are detonated, they'll deal damage. So have your tanks detonate these, ideally very far away from the raid. That way they're not going to deal that much damage. And other than that, you really shouldn't have to worry about it too much. As long as you avoid where they spawn from, usually what we did is we had a raid basically at the south side of the boss. If it's like a compass, they'll be at the bottom, and the tanks would be at the top tanking it. So we would just avoid where they would spawn at the bottom here, and then when the balls moved up to the top, the tanks would soak them. We wouldn't have to worry about it. When he goes into his construction phase, keep in mind the boss will take 99% less damage. Kill these Fel Reavers. If you kill them in time, you don't have to deal with any of those abilities, the Decimation, the Annihilation, or the Demolish. Kill him quickly, there's less mechanics to worry about, and it's an easy boss to knock over. Finally, Varimathras. This boss is kind of a healer's dream in terms of how much constant ticking damage that we're going to be having, and as a healer, I'm very, very happy to see that we're having an encounter that does have such high, consistent damage that we're going to be having there, so kudos to that. But getting into the fight, the big thing that we have to be worrying about is, of course, the Misery debuff. It is a 100% healing taken debuff. They're not going to be taking any healing, but Absorbs and Spirit Link Totem, things like that, actually still work. So keep that in mind. Holy Priest, for example, Guardian Spirit. If the target breaks the Guardian Spirit, it will put them up to 40% health, because that is not a heal, right? Keep that in mind. This is extremely useful for Disciplined Priests to take Clarity of Will. That way they're able to kind of provide a safety net just in case targets are going to be still taking lots and lots of constant damage and will be dropping very, very low. You can always put a powered shield on them, but sometimes it may not be quite enough to keep them topped off. Big thing here, stack up as a group. If you are alone, you will be taking more and more shadow damage from Alone in the Darkness. So this is where you'll have abilities like the Necrotic Embrace come out, which will basically put out a Spreading Plague if it expires and you're within 10 yards of other players. So what you have to do here is you just have to run out of the raid, stay away from other players, and then just make sure that you are topped off, or make sure anybody with the debuff is topped off. Because when Necrotic Embrace expires, it tries to spread to other players, and those players will have Misery on them, so they'll be able to take no healing. But they have to quickly run back into the groups that they won't be taking any damage from Alone in the Darkness, right? So keep them as topped off as possible. They'll get Misery, they'll get back into the group, they'll stop taking too much extra shadow damage, extra damage that cannot be healed up until the debuff falls off. So having these shields, having these absorbs is a really good way of just kind of keeping their health pool positive until they can be healed up later on. You will have the Marked Prey come out, which will just knock back the player who it hits. The big thing here is you don't want to be taking any of the damage from Alone in the Darkness. So we had our Rogues and Demon Hunters run up, soak the Marked Prey, and then just instantly be able to leap or Shadow Step or whatever back into the boss. They're not taking any kind of damage like that. From there, it's really working on making sure you're keeping your tanks alive. You know, we, for example, just had our Soul Stones on tanks so that they could instantly get rezzed up. This fight is mainly just about having your tanks getting their taunts off together, learning the fight for them, and that was where most of our wipes were kind of coming from. So, but you as a healer, if you're able to make sure that, you know, even if a tank got dropped really, really low when they got their misery debuff, having those cow shields or even dropping a spirit link or something like that, keeping them topped off there can be extremely valuable. You may even want to explore, for example, using Deceiver's Grand Design if you have it. If you're having a lot of problems, putting it on one of the tanks, for example, if they're not able to be healed, at least so that it'll proc that extra shield. They'll have a little bit of extra effective health to work with. That way, by the time that shield is depleted and their health is really, really low, misery will fall off, and then you'll be able to get them topped off. This wraps up the second video in the Healing Heroic Antorus series. If you'd like to check out the first one, the link will be in the description below. Next up will be the last 3 bosses, the Covenant of Shavara, Agramar, and of course Argus. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. We will be streaming all of our Mythic progression coming up. The link is going to be in my link to my Twitch stream is going to be in the description below. It's going to be Monday through Thursday, 7 to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be sure to check out the live stream. Thank you so much again for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.